Let us continue now with the process of cellular respiration in this particular chapter. As we had discussed earlier, the cellular respiration process involves the breakdown of the glucose. And this process of breaking down of the glucose might or might not involve the oxygen. And if it is going to involve the oxygen, it is going to be the aerobic respiration. And if it is not, it is going to be the anaerobic mode of respiration. And this process is going to be intracellular, that is going to take place inside the cell. And I was telling in the other video also that some of the process occurs in the cytoplasm and some of the other process occur in the mitochondria. So let us understand the process of cellular respiration. So as I was saying, the glucose is going to be broken down. Now the glucose is a 6-carbon compound. And this is a hexose. Hexose means a 6-carbon based structure. Now as you can see here in this particular structure, this is going to be the 1' position. This second carbon, actually here, this is the second, first carbon is here, 1', this is second prime, so 2'. Okay, in this particular place you are going to have the 3', and here you are going to have the 4', and here you are going to have the 5'. So these are the 5 carbon. So as I said, the glucose is a 6-carbon. So you are going to show here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there is a last carbon, and the last carbon is going to be this carbon of CH2OH. So this is your 6' carbon. So the numbering in this particular sugars are going to be in this manner: 1', 2', 3', 4', and 5'. And at the 5' carbon you are having the additional carbon that is going to be the CH2OH, that is the 6th carbon that is going to be associated. Now you'll learn in higher class why these numberings are important and how they are associated with the other biomolecular structures, and you'll also see the importance of these, that basically differentiates the deoxyribonucleic acid DNA from that of the ribonucleic acid RNA. So in the first step, that is universal for every single living organism, the cellular respiration pathway, that is the glucose getting converted into pyruvate, which is basically a 3-carbon based structure. Now the glucose is a 6-carbon based structure, so when the glucose forms pyruvate, it gives rise to 2 molecules of this 3-carbon based structure pyruvate. Now the process of conversion of glucose to pyruvate is a multi-step process, and that is called the glycolysis, and it typically occurs in the cytoplasm. Now this, as I said, this is a common pathway for both the aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now glycolysis is a multi-step process consisting of number of intermediates and enzymes. You learn about this in detail in class 11th. Now what happens to the pyruvate? Because end product is what? End product is we require energy. So what happens to the pyruvate from now on? This is the common pathway. Glucose getting converted into pyruvate is a common pathway. So from now on, what happens to the pyruvate depends on whether there is oxygen available or not, and if the oxygen is available, whether it is sufficient or not. Now let us begin by seeing 3 different situations. So in the beginning, let's talk about one of the condition where there is no oxygen. So in case of yeast, there is no oxygen. So what happens here? Here the glucose gets converted into pyruvate. It's a common process, glycolysis. But when the oxygen is absent, the pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon based structure, gets converted into ethanol. Ethanol is a 2-carbon based structure. So along with ethanol, it gives CO2, a 1-carbon base. CO2 is the final product of the respiration pathway, cellular respiration pathway. And along with that, it gives energy, but very less energy, that is going to be only 2 adenosine triphosphates. Now, when we compare this with the humans, right, as I said, again, this particular pathway is the same, there is no change. Glucose to pyruvate, glycolysis in cytoplasm. Now, with the pyruvate here undergoes the process of aerobic respiration here, and then gets converted into the carbon dioxide, completely broken down, completely oxidized. Along with that, it releases some amount of water, and it releases energy, a large amount of energy, and that is, to be precise, 38 molecules of ATP. As you can see here it is only 2 and here it is 38. So as you can see here, cellular respiration in humans, their aerobic respiration is much more efficient in energy production compared to that of the anaerobic respiration. And from this you can imagine that oxygen's important in this particular process. Now let us talk about another process of cellular respiration that happens in the muscle cells, for example. Now this is an example where there is a lack of oxygen, that is, optimum amount of oxygen is not available to the cells, and the cells we are giving example of is the muscle cells. Now if you're running in the ground or you're playing in the ground after a long period of time, your body is not used to supply the oxygen at a rate that your body is demanding for. As a result of which, instead of going for the complete oxidation, the body goes for, the cells there goes for lactate fermentation. That is, the glucose, instead of getting converted into CO2 as in case of complete oxidation, instead it forms a 3 molecular structure that is going to be the lactic acid or lactate, thereby the name lactate fermentation. And with this it produces some amount of energy, which is not much, and this lactic acids get stored or get deposited in the muscle cells. And when the muscle cells start depositing the lactic acids, then we get the pain in the muscles, that is called the cramps, muscular cramps. So in this particular image you can see the entire process of cellular respiration that actually happens in the cells. You'll learn about the details of this process in class 11, but just to give you a brief idea, the first step is glycolysis, that is, the glucose gets converted into pyruvate, and along with that it produces energy, that is in the form of adenosine triphosphate and an intermediate NADH, which is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide in the reduced form. Now from here the pyruvate is going to be undergoing a process called pyruvate oxidation, in which the pyruvate combines with a molecule called acetyl coenzyme A, and along with the process it produces again that NADH and CO2. Remember, the CO2 is getting released here, and then this acetyl coenzyme A, it enters the citric acid cycle or the TCA cycle, that is tricarboxylic acid cycle, or also known as the Krebs cycle. All of these are the same, and in this cyclic process again it produces some amount of ATP, it releases CO2, and it produces NADH and FADH2. The NADH and FADH2 actually is used to produce energy in the oxidative phosphorylation process, and this happens in the mitochondrial matrix. So this is the entire process of the cellular respiration. As you can see, first process is happening in the cytosol or the cytoplasm, and the second steps onwards is happening in the mitochondrial matrix, and this one in the mitochondrial membranes. So glucose get converted into pyruvate, produces some amount of ATP and NADH, and the pyruvate is getting converted into acetyl coenzyme A, thereby producing the NADH and CO2, and the acetyl coenzyme A undergoes the citric acid cycle, thereby producing the NADH and FADH2 along with some amount of energy in the form of ATP, and CO2 is released. Now the NADH and FADH2 is going to undergo the process of oxidative phosphorylation to produce energy in the form of ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Now this summarizes the entire process or the pathway of the cellular respiration. So as you can see here, glycolysis, glucose gets converted to pyruvate, it moves to the Krebs cycle, right? Some amount of energy is produced by substrate level phosphorylation, and the electrons are carried in the form of NADH and FADH2. The electrons move through the electron transport chain, and through the oxidative phosphorylation they produce the ATP, and the ATP is synthesized with the help of the oxidative phosphorylation process. Now ATP is the energy currency for the most of the cellular processes in the living organism, and one molecule of ATP, when you are going to break it down into ADP and inorganic phosphate, it is going to give around 30.5 kilojoules per mole of energy. Now you have seen this earlier, but again just to explain, so this is the structure of the adenosine triphosphate. So you have an adenine molecule connected with 1, 2, 3 phosphates, and the bond between two phosphates are typically the high energy bond, and when we break one we get ADP along with the inorganic phosphate, and we also get the energy that is going to be used for all the endothermic process that is going to occur inside the cell, inside the body. That is why the ATP is important in the cellular activities. And this completes the understanding of the process of cellular respiration in brief. Thank you all for joining.